Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cloud Wars Live, where we explore today's digital revolution by speaking with business executives and thought leaders who are changing how the world lives, works, plays, learns, and dreams. Our guest today is Sean Ammirati for his monthly feature, Ammirati on Innovation. Sean is a professor at Carnegie Mellon's B-school, where he oversees the corporate startup lab program. Sean's also a venture capitalist. He's an author, and he's got his own podcast called Agile Giants. Sean, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
So, Sean, we're winding down 2019, and you had some thoughts about the coming year. And you had some interesting thoughts, or what do you make of all this?
Yeah, I'm usually wrong on these things, but I always think it's fun to spend a few minutes as the calendar turns thinking about what's coming in the next year. What are some of the things that could happen? And so I thought kind of a fun way to wrap up Cloud Wars Live for 2019 and get ready for next year would just be to kind of quickly walk through 5 different predictions on things that I think may happen in 2020, and specifically how they'll impact the tech and innovation ecosystem over the next year. And so I thought I would kind of walk through one at a time, and you and I could kind of bounce them back and forth just as a way to kind of wrap up the year here. And then obviously I'm sure between our different social channels and the podcast, et cetera, it'd be great to hear people's reaction to these, as well as thoughts that some of the audience may have on what's going to happen next year.
Well, Sean, that sounds great. And I really like the mix of topics that you had in companies, from big ones to little ones and places in between. So You have some thoughts about Slack for 2020.
So let's start with Slack, right? So Slack's an interesting company, obviously. I think it has definitely changed how people collaborate. But since going public about 6 months ago, the market cap of Slack has basically been slashed in half. I think the peak in June, shortly after it went out, was about $42 a share. And I looked this morning, it's trading at about $22 a share. So not quite a reduction by 50%, but almost. So if you think about that in terms of what's really meaningful, that means Slack's market cap today is about $12 billion. So not small. On the other hand, when you think about the balance sheets of the large enterprise tech companies today, that's not like that's an acquisition that they couldn't consume or afford to do. And I think, I went and pulled, and I'm gonna just read a couple statistics here.
Sure.
But I went and looked at the last earnings call, and as I was going through this, I was just thinking, like, what would these statistics be worth inside Oracle, Salesforce, Microsoft, even Google, right? And I don't know. I think you can make cases for each of these. I would say this, though: if you're in the corp dev department in one of the large enterprise tech companies today, and you're not actively thinking about the case to buy Slack, you need to ask yourself what you're spending your time on, because I think this is an incredible acquisition for somebody. So they ended the quarter with 105,000 paid customers, up about 30% year over year. They have 821 of those who are doing more than 100K a year in ARR, and 50 doing over $1 million in ARR. So what that says to me is, out of 105,000 customers, 104,000 plus are doing less than 100 grand a year in revenue. And I think that's a function of kind of the business still maturing. But, give that technology to the Salesforce sales team, the Microsoft sales team, the Oracle. I mean, Larry Ellison himself might get 2,000 or 3,000 customers up over $1 million by himself. But the point is, right, like there's a ton of headroom in this business. And it was probably a hard thing to take out at, north of 20 billion market cap, but hovering around 12 billion. I think if you're in a corp dev department in one of these places right now, you need to be looking hard at this and thinking about the synergies and the business case for it. I think you're going to have to convince the founders and the team there that this is a good thing for them and their companies, but they're a publicly traded company now. And even though they didn't go public the traditional way, they are a publicly traded company. And I think people need to be taking a hard look at this, because there certainly are, as the bankers like to say, some synergies here, I think, with some of the larger enterprise tech companies. So that was the first one. It just feels like could really be a win-win for both the Slack customers and one of these large enterprise tech companies to take an M&A move on Slack.
Sean, quick follow-up on that. I saw that I think when the Slack share price took a pretty good tumble, there were some people that tried to peg that to a recent release from Microsoft about the number of Teams users. Do you see that as a direct impact, or is this something of, let's make this pie even bigger for everybody?
Yeah, so you know, and I haven't looked at that closely, but my understanding is the way Microsoft is counting Teams versus the way Slack talks about paid customers, and I didn't, none of those were actually including all the free instances of Slack. My understanding from people who are closer to it is that those aren't an apples to apples comparison here. But to me, I think that the point is, you know, I think that the reality is the market is, for a variety of reasons. I think the fact that Microsoft's trying to make this a feature of their team solution is probably one of them. But the market has just not continued to hold up the value that it first went out at. And I think, you know, somebody's going to need to take advantage of that in the M&A departments in one of these places. It probably makes it a harder acquisition for Microsoft than the other names that we mentioned. On the other hand, when you think about some of the assets Microsoft has, like what could LinkedIn plus Slack do if you were to combine? I think things could become very interesting, especially with the shared work channel or shared channels, I guess, now that Slack is doing out there. And I think they have about a quarter of their paid customers using those shared channels at this point.
Yeah, Sean, it's a wild thing. And, you know, you get to looking at a couple of years with what HoloLens and that type of, you know, mixed reality technology could bring to, you know, a level of collaboration that right now seems a little out there. But interesting point. Okay, we'll keep an eye on that one. And then, Sean, you know, going from a relative startup to one of the largest corporations in the world, what'd you think about, you've got some thoughts about Walmart?
Yeah, so you know, we've been talking a lot throughout the whole year about incumbency advantage, right? On the last couple of podcasts, we've talked about the Disney Plus thing. And as I was thinking about, like, well, what are other enterprises with just incredible assets that if they put them together in the right way could have their own sort of Disney Plus moment? And as I was thinking through it, it just feels like Walmart is so well positioned to do the same thing. And so, you know, the way I thought about framing this out is, you know, I think Walmart, similar to Disney, is in 2020 going to do what Disney did last year, which is move from playing defense to playing offense. And that's not to say that Walmart's not done anything interesting before. I think Walmart's Labs was interesting. I think the Jet.com acquisition, although probably not the right bet, it was a relatively modest bet for Walmart, you know, relative to the size of that company. But I think over the next year, you're going to see Walmart probably go out and buy one or two very large companies. I know some people have been floating FedEx as a potential candidate there, so you would sort of integrate the supply chain there. But I think there's a Shopify's and other interesting. So I think you'll see them make a large acquisition to solidify the e-commerce part of theirs, while also allowing them to continue to leverage the assets that they have. I think you'll see a further investment in Walmart Labs, and hopefully what I'd love to see is some new business models for Walmart to experiment with as well. So maybe thinking about how they could move into recurring revenue, things like that. But it just feels like, I think in the same way that, you know, as we wrap up this year, one of the big stories of the year in corporate innovation is Disney Plus and the great success that's been. I suspect at the end of 2020, we'll be saying similar things about Walmart, or at least the company is well positioned for that to be the case.
Yeah, Sean, I love that prospect. And again, I think one of your key themes throughout the year has been companies today have a choice, right? And you must make one or the other, or the market will make it for you. You either are a disruptor or you're disrupted. And it seems like some of the interesting things that Walmart has been doing have been to fortify, sort of enhance the stuff it can already do. And it sounds like what you're saying is it's time to jump into some new arenas as well, different business models, right down to that. Yep. So fascinating possibilities.
Yep.
And then you've got some thoughts, Sean, about another giant company here, Amazon, and something that it might do.
Well, this one is probably closest to a Cloud Wars prediction as well. So I just can't wrap my head around why Amazon won't end up needing to spin out AWS this year. And I've certainly seen all the denials from the management team of, no interest in this, and that, that they don't want to be two separate companies. But I think along multiple dimensions here, it just makes too much sense for Amazon to not do this. And what I mean by that is I think both, I think AWS is going to increasingly bump into a problem where large companies don't like funding their competitors in other parts of the business, right? And so it's just, we were just talking about Walmart. How does Walmart feel about cutting checks to Amazon for AWS instances? I have no inside information here, but just having done business for 20 years, I can't imagine they're happy to send checks to Seattle so that their competitor can have subsidized competition on the e-commerce front, right? And so I think there's that market dynamic that's just going to demand it. I also think as great as all of the other enterprise cloud companies are, the reality is that they all come along with something else, right? So if you want to buy the cloud today, right? If you're going to invest in Google as an investor, you also have to take along search advertising with it. If you want to buy Microsoft, right, you got to take along, and these are not bad things, but it makes it impossible for an investor who really just wants to index cloud as a theme. And the reality is AWS is so large, and unlike the others where I think it's much harder to talk about the synergies between AWS and e-commerce. Whereas like if you're Microsoft, it's very easy to talk about the Microsoft cloud synergies with the rest of your technology platforms, or same thing with Google, right? So I think for Amazon, it makes a ton of sense internally. I think the market will love it. And I think their customers, frankly, will be elated to stop subsidizing retail. And I think if Amazon spins out AWS, the day after that spin out happens, you're talking about one of the largest companies in the world immediately being just the AWS part of it, right? And so this is not a small entity post spin out, and I think it's going to happen in 2020, much to the management denial. I think there'll be a lot of people who will have to reframe those arguments over the next year.
Yes, what I meant to say was, and so on, but yeah,
right.
Sean, I suspect that AWS will finish calendar 2019 about $38 billion in revenue. So they're already among the top 7-8 technology companies in the world, and growing at about, right now about 32-33%. So incredible opportunities. And I think you're 100% right. There's a ton of retailers that Microsoft has jumped all over because of exactly what you said. So interesting prospect there.
Yep.
Sean, if we flip back to a relatively small company in the startup field, all these changes in the world of business today, the move toward digital business has really driven the need for ongoing education for people inside big companies. And you had identified a company, Lynda, as one that stands out there some.
Yeah, so 5 years ago, right, LinkedIn bought Lynda for $1.5 billion, right? And when that came out, people thought, okay, it's finally time in the corporate education space for online education to get serious, online corporate continuing education to get serious. And unfortunately, I would say over the last 5 years, I'm not sure that there's as much evidence of that as one might hope. Now, I do think my understanding from people who are closer to it is that it's been an accretive acquisition for LinkedIn, and that they and now Microsoft are happy with it. But in some ways it feels a little bit like a one-time blip, not a trend. And yet I think if you look at where the market's heading now, and as the rate of change has continued to accelerate, I think whether it's LinkedIn doubling down on that acquisition and actually making something of it as part of Microsoft, or Salesforce with their Trailhead platform, or some of the other, like I think SAP, as they flush out this new human experience management stuff. I mean, part of this is you can't make HR, you can't reinvent HR without making the people who are HR is responsible for also reinventing them and empowering them to change their careers. And the way we work is just, it's only increasing, right? And I think people know that part of it, but I think what you're going to see is how we actually do that education and how our employers think about educating their employees, I think is going to become very serious over the next 12 months. And I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of these large companies actually get serious about offerings around this space, right? And so I think that's going to actually be fun, because it's actually going to help make the people who are working at these companies more efficient and effective. And I think there's a ton of, so far, a lot of online education, even the Lynda stuff. And I mean, 1.5 billion is no small acquisition price. So much of it so far has been, let's take the model that worked in a legacy format and let's just bring it online. And I think what you're going to see in the next 12 months is as great product thinkers at places like Salesforce, SAP, maybe LinkedIn as well, look at this, as well as a bunch of entrepreneurs continue to take fresh looks at this. I think you're going to see, okay, what's a digitally first approach to this online corporate continuing education space? And I think it's going to become a big category over the next 12 months.
Well, Sean, it certainly has been an area of huge interest. You mentioned how SAP has sort of flipped the old name of HCM to Human Experience Management. You've got Salesforce, Oracle, SAP, certainly Workday, all moving into the employee experience market as well. So this could be exactly as you're saying, that new type of tool that allows them to take that switch in the name and actually change fundamentally this continuing education, because everybody's going to have to constantly refresh what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and have that be tied into the overall corporate flow of strategy, ideas, and priorities.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
So, Sean, then finally, you felt that from a macro perspective, the market has been soaring along, but markets don't stay high forever, do they?
Well, so this is one that is interesting, right? Because we've been doing budgets with all of our portfolio companies over the last 2 months, right? And every portfolio CEO is trying to figure out, like, well, what's the market going to look like, over 2020? And, I'm not an economist, and, I don't even try to pretend to be one. But it is important to have points of view on this, because it does impact what types of companies are desirable, what kind of companies aren't, and how to think about the right financing strategies around innovation, from 3-person startups all the way to the largest enterprises. And the conclusion I've come to, and again, as I said at the top here, Bob, often these are wrong. They're often delivered with confidence, and that confidence often turns out to be incorrect. But the conclusion I've come to is that the market almost certainly needs to correct in 2020. It's been too long since the last market correction, and there are boom bust cycles here that feel kind of inevitable. What I think is interesting, though, is as that relates to innovation, thinking about what's going to happen there. And the conclusion I've come to is that will, similar to the WeWork correction, if where you saw that correct valuations a little bit, I think that will continue to rationalize startup valuations a little bit, and just kind of continue what you already see happening there. But I actually think the more interesting point here is, even though I think you're going to see a correction in the overall environment, I do think, because of the number of companies where they're committed to this transition from physical to digital, or we've talked before, I don't love the handle digital transformation, but sort of it's a clean way to describe it. It's because of how important digital transformation is to these large enterprises today. I think the impact in the software sector is going to actually be less than it was in 2008, and certainly less than it was in the early 2000s. So I do think you'll see the overall market correct, because we're it feels like due for a stock market correction here. But I think it's only going to minimally rationalize startup valuations and only minimally impact the overall software sector, because there's this even larger trend, even more important than the boom bust cycle, which is just so many things moving from physical problems to digital problems, and the software industry really being critical to make that happen.
Well, Sean, that's great. And can I toss in one final one for you?
Sure.
Now, give us a prediction, 2020. How many triathlons are you going to do?
I just did my schedule over the Christmas break. I think I'm going to do 3 next year. So I'm going to do one. I wanted to go up to do a full distance Ironman next year, but as I look at all the work things I need to and I want to accomplish next year, it's just out of scope. So I'm going to do another half Ironman this year. This one I'm 99% sure I'm going to do one in Waco, Texas in October, because you've actually met him before. The guy who was the best man at my wedding, John Passman, now is in Waco, Texas. So I want to go see him and do the triathlon out there. But yeah, it should be at least 3. Plus, you never know, opportunistically more than that. So.
All right. Well, all of us fans of yours here at Cloud Wars, we're going to check in with you mid-year because I think you do have one of those Iron Man in you, Sean. You know,
I appreciate it.
You're being cautious about your outlook for 2020.
All right. Thanks, Bob.
Sean, great stuff. Always wonderful to hear from you. Very intriguing ideas you put out there for 2020. Thanks for the great fun we've had this year with Ammirati on innovation. And Sean, we'll look forward to seeing you again sometime soon in 2020.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks to all of you for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Have a great New Year's and a fantastic 2020. See you soon.